we will begin. Good evening, and welcome to the Monday, October 21st meeting of the Radnor Township Board of Commissioners. Will everyone please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, good evening. I hope everyone had a good weekend despite the dismal Eagles performance last night. All right, we will move on. I will make notice that the board met in executive session just prior to this with Commissioner Booker, Commissioner Farhi, myself, Commissioner Larkin, Commissioner Abel, and Commissioner Nagel. Commissioner Clark was absent. And we discussed matters of real estate and personnel. Consent agenda. Does anyone have anything they'd like to pull from the consent agenda this evening?
Letter E and letter F.
Okay. Anything else? Does anyone from the staff have anything they'd like to pull from the consent agenda? Is there anything that the public would like to pull from the consent agenda this evening? All right, may I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, items A through D?
So second.
All right, all those in favor of consent agenda items A through D, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Clark absent. Item E, Commissioner Booker.
Resolution 2019-110, authorizing the township manager to execute a PICO Green Region grant application for the Garrett Hill Gateway project. Kindly go through the work that's proposed under this grant.
This would be to support the bond money that was borrowed earlier this year. This would supplement those funds. We are also working with PICO and SEPTA and PennDOT on this particular project. So this just seems to fall right in the category here to apply for this grant at this time. So it would go for the improvements in that particular area.
And what's the area that we're talking about here?
It is on Conestoga Road from the Rosemont Building Campus all the way down to where you get the bridge. You go under the bridge there, the SEPTA tracks on Conestoga Road. I know Steve has been very involved with this. With the architects, there's been an initial rendering that has been completed. There will be community meetings that will take place sometime later in November to continue to move this along.
There's a picture of the area, Commissioner, on that memo, looking up from the bridge.
Right. I have it on page 64, you mean, of the packet?
Correct.
Yeah, mine says 64. But so that's in that area underneath the power lines.
That's correct.
Correct. It's bordered by Conestoga Road, the SEPTA R100 speed line, and right through the middle are the towers of PICO to carry the power lines through.
All right. It's only 10,000 additional, right? So how much, I mean, why do we need the 10,000?
Well, that will be to help pay for this should it move forward as it moves forward.
It'll be 20,000, I guess. 10,000 for the grant and 10,000 matching.
That's correct. Well, we've got a bigger match, so I think we end up, the match would be what we borrowed, which is 150,000.
We had this, you went through this project, I mean, a year and a half or so. And
Correct.
We looked at this. So isn't this like a $50 or $80 or $100,000 project? We need the 20,000? That's my question.
We do. And the other option of this is there have been a significant issue of stormwater runoff in that particular area, which creates a huge driving situation with ice during that time of year. So as part of this, we will help to capture stormwater, and that will be something that we'll be working with PennDOT as well on that.
I'm sorry, it's right here. The total project is $350,000. The project was included at $150,000. So actually, that's not near enough to do the project you have contemplated right now.
There is design work that needs to be done there. Our hope is to incorporate some materials from SEPTA and also from PICO, but also there'll be some stormwater management that will take place in that particular area, which that will come to the board with the final proposal too.
I guess my question is, why not? Do we need another 150,000? And why not ask for that? Why don't, are we going to keep, it sounds like we're going to come back. Are we going to come back? It sounds like we will.
I think that was their initial design at 300,000, but again, too, we get a lot of architects that like to come in with higher numbers, so we will end up trying to work that down and then also try to determine what stormwater management will take place, as well as what participation can we anticipate from SEPTA and PICO.
Maybe SEPTA or PICO will pick up that 150,000.
That's my hope that they will do that. If not, then there could be in-kind services too as well.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comment on this?
Yeah, I want to pick up on Rich's question. So, I mean, the line that gives me trouble in this resolution is under fiscal impact, last sentence. So in addition to the grant, additional township funds or some reallocation of funds from other projects will need to be looked at. Like I don't, we went through the bond and commissioners talked about their priorities and voted based on that certain projects would be in there. What projects are we identifying that are going to be cut or money reallocated?
But we don't anticipate any money to be reallocated towards this project.
So can we strip that sentence out of this resolution?
I have no problem with that. It's in the legislative summary, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying we're not going to cut projects that were discussed during conversation of the bond?
No, sir. And just so everybody understands, this is a very high-level sketch, and it was a very high-level estimate. Until we start to go through, as the manager said, to see where we can cut and get down to an actual design drawing, that was very high level. There is no intent to reduce one project for this.
Okay.
So you guys will be looking to get a design that comes in at the number that we put in the bond? Because
That's correct.
I would want to make sure that we're not kind of getting ourselves back into the situation we were in before, where we had projects that we got grant money for, and then we hadn't put the money in our own budget, and then they kind of sat, and then we were afraid we were going to lose the grant money. So
Correct,
that
correct.
one- Okay.
Well, we have a pretty detailed drawing here. It's got three, I guess, weirs. It's got three dams. I don't know what, I guess those are gabions. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, then a head wall, an end wall, and then another collection area. So all new regrading in that area and new, the gabions, I guess that's what those are to slow it down.
Check dams.
I'm sorry?
Check dams. Boulders, gabions, could be, that, like I say, that level of detail we're not at, nor have we gone through our processes with those three entities, PICO, SEPTA, and PennDOT. So again, it's high level. That part could change.
And you're saying that there's ice that gets before the bridge right there, as we're seeing problems with ice before the bridge?
It crisscrosses Conestoga Road there, so yes. we
In the
do have
wintertime,
problems.
Commissioner, if you look at this, when the vegetation is gone, you'll see severely eroded swales, you'll see stone lying over, railroad ties, all from that runoff that comes down there.
And is that a whole new pipe that needs to go in, or is that existing pipe that's between the head wall and the end wall?
Again, on a high-level sketch that's not designed, that is a pipe that goes in there.
That's a new pipe, and then to be covered.
Correct.
And I think as part of this, just on Steve's part, is we need to work with PennDOT to get that water under the road.
So also, since it's a stormwater management improvement, is it, if we needed some money for it, could we allocate money from the stormwater?
I think that would be something we'd bring back to the board once we have close to a final design after a lot of input from our residents.
But you said the first thing is to try to get PICO or PennDOT
Absolutely.
to contribute.
All right, any other questions from the commissioners? Any staff? Any public comment? Good evening, Sarah.
Sarah Pilling, 29 Garrett Avenue. As you all know, for the Macron Park, the Garrett Hillians got very much involved. And they really wish is not strong enough. They would expect that the community that bounds this, because it's the way into Garrett Hill, would be included in the planning process. Dave Cannon first worked on this in '98, and John Fisher spent 8 years working on this project. So I think I don't believe it's going to be a quick fix. I remember Dave saying to me that when it started to rain and it started to flow down Conestoga Road, within 5 minutes, the people on Roberts Road saw the flooding start. So it's not simply that bank and that road, but there's a stream there at the bottom by the tunnel, and that all flows down onto Roberts Road. So it's really not a tight, short project. It really could end up going much further because you've got to be careful how it floods down there on Roberts when it gets down into that hollow. But I think I know the Garrett Hillians want to be involved, and they would expect to be involved some way. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought,
Can I just address
yeah, I was
that?
going to say, didn't you have a meeting? Or?
Yeah, so next month, November 21st, there'll be a town hall meeting. And Bob, I invited you there, and I think we can talk about different options, and that underpass or that improvement will be top priority on the list when we speak. So for whoever's watching this, if you want to come, bring your questions, and hopefully we'll have some answers for you.
Great. Any other comment? All right, I'll call the vote, or I'll ask for, may I get a motion to approve Resolution 2019-110?
So moved.
Is it amended, right? Didn't Jake ask for an amended?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't see that. It wasn't part of the resolution. All right, so we have a motion and a second. I believe we've had comment. All those in favor of Resolution 2019-110, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Clark absent. Item F, Resolution 2019-108, Commissioner Booker.
Resolution 2019-108, resolution to execute authorizing the township manager to execute all documents related to the Delaware County Open Space and Greenways Municipal Grant to provide additional funding for the Radnor Tap Trail. Again, review this is requesting up to an additional $500,000 from the Delaware County Open Space and Greenways Municipal Grant to fund this. Kindly review whether there's any match and any other financial implications to try to get to the $2.6 million that is anticipated, and bridging the gap from the $1.725 million already received in funding.
So, Commissioner, if you remember when Peter Simoni was last before the board, the price of the project has increased. So right now, the township, in round numbers, without this grant, would be required to fund over $800,000 of it. The hope here is to obtain this grant. And if you notice, it says up to $500,000. We don't know what we would get awarded to help reduce the township's exposure in this project.
So is there a match? And last time we talked about this, we were waiting for the federal approval, and didn't we receive the federal approval on this?
Not yet, sir. It's a state approval. It comes from Harrisburg.
So if we get $500,000 from this grant, are we matching $500,000?
Our match is part of what we had already provided in the original grants. That would be our match.
So there's no additional match as a result of this grant application?
No.
Any other questions? All right, is there any staff comment? Any public comment? All right, can I get a motion to approve Resolution 2019-108? So moved. Second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Clark absent. Before we move into public participation, Commissioner Farhi, did you have something you wanted to say?
I just wanted to thank everyone that participated, as well as those who planned there was an event on Saturday. It's the Dance Down Dog and Dash. It was at the St. Catherine's Church, and it usually goes to a great cause. This year, the cause went to one of the Ward 7 residents. I know there are a lot of Ward 7 residents that planned for it. Kristen Page, I know Carol Lohmeyer, among others. So all those that planned it and helped out and ran in it, thank you very much. I know it means a lot to the Old Oaks community. And there's another event, another race, which is on Sunday the 27th, which is the Radnor Run, and that starts at 7 a.m. That one I will not be participating in, as I am too tired from strollering a 30-pound kid in a stroller who had a flat tire. So.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Farhi. Public participation. Does anyone have anything they would like to say this evening? We invite you to come out and participate.
Ian, could we have the screen?
Good evening again, Sarah.
Good evening. This time I'm wearing my Ready for 100 hat. And I wanted to let you all know, and anybody who might be watching who's not here, to know that the Ready for 100 group, called the Green Team here in Radnor Township, is launching their public education forums. And the first one is next Tuesday, discussing, sort of reviewing what is Ready for 100, and then doing residential energy efficiency. And Michael Schneller, who's head of PECO's home energy audits, is going to be here and outline it. And there will be an opportunity for people to sign up. If enough people sign up, it is free. And then John Kelly is going to talk about some of Orange Energy Solutions, is going to talk about some more relatively minor things that one can do to energy mitigation. And so it's at 7 o'clock here in this room till 8:30. And then 2 weeks later, on the 12th of November, there will be a second one to talk about Solarize. And a young man who lives in Garrett Hill did a great deal of research on putting solar panels on his roof, and he's going to talk about his experience and all the reasoning and rationale he went through. So we invite you to come. It's free. We'd love to have you. We'll have information, and I wanted to be able to put it out to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I know that's on the township website as well. Yes. Yep. Any other public comment this evening? All right.
Madam President?
Yes, sir.
If I may, just a reminder, this Saturday is the recycling day here at the township. And the rule of thumb is anything with the plug can be recycled. So that would be able to let you know it's from 9 a.m. until 12 noon. Last year, I know we were backed way out to Lancaster Avenue and on Conestoga Road. So our hope is the recycling contractor will be here early enough to set up and then try to make it flow a lot easier. But 9 to noon, and then that's also paper shredding as well. So that event takes place this Saturday.
And 9 to noon, where is that pickup?
Right here at the Township Building.
Right here at the Township Building?
Right here at the Township Building.
So so if you have one of the big, you roll it up here, or is there outdoor drop-off?
There will be people here to assist with that. So if it's in your car, truck, vehicle, there will be people here to assist taking that from your vehicle.
And you come up to the circle, or you go down below?
Actually, last year they had down below as well as up here. So it'll be both areas, and there'll be people to direct where everybody needs to go.
Is there a better place where you want people to queue up? I know some people were coming from this way and some people were coming from Conestoga. Does it matter? Or I know there are people who are like, I waited in line and then I got up there and I came in the wrong direction. And
It should work a lot better. The problem last year was the recycling contractor got here late, so everything was backed up prior to. So we're expecting them to be here an hour early to be able to be set up. So as soon as they come in, we can flow a lot easier, because I actually got held up for an hour back on Brookside here because of how backed up it was, but it was great that residents were bringing their recyclables here, so
There could be
Wow.
a Little League game, too. So are they going to be able to get in and out?
it'll be very close. It'll be very tight.
Well, I put in my newsletter the past, I think, 3 weeks, and I probably had over 150 clicks on that one link alone. So, yeah, get here early, I think. All right, anything else? All right, moving along. Announcements of boards and commission vacancies. Commissioner Larkin.
Good afternoon. We have the following vacancies, although this is probably subject to change in just about a minute. We have 2 vacancies on the CARFAC, which is the Citizens Audit Review and Financial Advisory Committee. 1 vacancy on the Code Appeals Board, which will require either a master electrician, a master plumber, or a general contractor. 1 vacancy on the HARB, 1 vacancy on the Shade Tree Commission, and 1 vacancy on the Willows Park Preserve. Moving on then to item 4, possible appointments to various boards and commissions. We last week met with a collection of people who are interested in some of those positions that I just announced. I will move for the appointment of Emily Nelson to the CARFAC. Is there a second? Second. Is there any commissioner comment? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. I will move for the, motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Clark absent. I will move for the appointment of Frank Paris to the Shade Tree Commission.
I'll second.
Is there any commissioner comment? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Hearing none, the motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Clark absent. I'll move for the appointment of Christina Berlin to the Willows Park Preserve Board.
I second.
Is there any commissioner comment? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Clark absent.
All right, very good. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who came out to interview. And I'm sure there'll be vacancies again starting in January as people's terms expire. So, moving along, committee reports. Item A, 2020 budget presentation, high level. Mr. White.
Good evening,
Ron.
and thank you. Ian, if you could fire up the screens. Thank you. As we get started, I'd just like to take a quick second and thank a few folks that are behind the scenes, specifically the finance staff. I spent a lot of time going through all of the different programs and numbers, and it occurred to me when I was finalizing this over the weekend just how much work that they're putting into making sure that the entries that hit our accounting system are accurate. And it's reassuring when I'm going through periodically, especially taking a deep dive this time of year, that we can have confidence in the numbers because of the work that they're doing. And I just wanted to take a moment and make sure that they're recognized for that work because I know every day that they take it very seriously. And we've got the audit results that back that up. But again, it's just reassuring that when you go into it, into the detail, you see it and you see that it's accurate and up to date. So it's very much appreciated. And we're going to be looking at numbers tonight that are a very high level. But behind those are thousands and thousands of lines of activity and deposits and checks and all sorts of movement of financial information. So when it gets aggregated and rolled up, and knowing that it's in pretty good shape, I'm very thankful to those folks for doing that. At the same time, the department heads have spent the last month and a half working with each other and with me and the members of the finance department to get their budgets in order. Again, you're not going to see that level of detail tonight. We'll dive into that a little bit deeper next Monday. But they've spent a great deal of time going through their lines of activity, their contracts, their supplies, staffing levels, and all the like to get us to where we're at tonight. So I appreciate all of their efforts too, and I know it's not always fun and exciting, and the discussions aren't always easy, but everyone's always professional, and we're like-minded in that at the end of the day, the goal is to provide services to the township, and that's what allows us to get to an end product that most of us feel pretty good about. Finally, it's always difficult to assign finite resources to infinite requests. And we talked a little bit about that at the last meeting when we were talking about direction and how to build this budget. So what you'll see tonight is a 2020 general fund operating statement built at a baseline level. So where we're providing the township, the core services that the township provides, and then we'll take a look at a list of menu items that are outside of what the base operation looks like. We're going to take a look at the major revenue assumptions and expense assumptions so that everyone has an understanding on what we're building from. We'll talk a little bit about capital, and then we'll get into the sanitary sewer fund. I had the stormwater fund in at one point. We took that out until we get to the capital projects because that fund's a little different. It is entirely driven by what projects we ultimately approve. So there wasn't a whole lot of need to go into the detail tonight. Based on what you as a board decide to construct or install in terms of stormwater, that'll drive where that fund goes. Whereas the other funds like sanitary and general fund have a lot more moving parts. And then we'll talk a little bit about the next steps. So the baseline operating statement represents today's township-only service offering at today's tax rates. So the baseline assumptions include revenues that are built on no changes in the millage rate at this time. Again, that's as these conversations progress and we get a little bit into more of the detail of the budget and what direction the board wants to go on funding different activities or programs. That may or may not change. And then for the non-tax related activity, just regular activity for the departments and the permits and the daily transactions that happen here over the counter. Again, the services that are included in the baseline assume today's level with headcounts at the levels that were incorporated in the board-approved reorganization that occurred last fall. The capital includes the departmental fleet and capital replacement as it has in the past couple of years, but we're still short on a comprehensive funding plan that includes our infrastructure, parks, and all of those major long-term capital items. So at this point, we don't have a number in there yet. We have an estimated amount in the menu, but it's not incorporated in the baseline. And then with regard to the fire, library, and other community organizations, we've incorporated some estimated funding based on growth that we've incorporated in prior years' budgets, and those are listed on the menu items as well for the board's consideration. And at the same time, those organizations have been invited to present to the Board of Commissioners at next week's special meeting. Jumping backwards to January of 2019, where we had our first special meeting of the year to talk about some of the strains financially that the township is going to work through going forward. I just wanted to hit some of the highlights of that meeting real quick because a lot of this is still very much relevant now. That before with regard to the millage rates for the township before 2019, the last change in millage rate that we approved went back to 2012. And we were able to do that based on some pretty aggressive business tax growth. And during those years, we were able to expand our OPEB funding plan. We were able to fund capital. We were able to do some other things. However, in the last 2 years, we've seen those business taxes slow down, which is putting a greater strain on the real estate tax side of our revenue base. When it comes to the pension and OPEB, we've spent a lot of time talking about this. We've incorporated an OPEB funding plan that we're spending about $1.5 million more in 2020 than we were back in 2012 when those millage rates were set. And again, we were able to do that based on business tax revenue that that we were realizing. Capital funding, the same thing. We've incorporated a pay-as-you-go program that has been up and running now for close to 10 years, and it's operating as planned. We're replacing our fleet when those vehicles are at the end of their useful life. So we're keeping the fleet moving, as well as replacing departmental capital, which includes the mowers, the leaf blowers, the smaller equipment items that the staff is using out in the field to provide those services. But we're still short then on the, as I mentioned, the infrastructure and long-term assets. And then some other things that have kind of popped up throughout this year that we've spent some time talking about. I just wanted to highlight quickly is trash and recycling costs have increased by over $300,000 in the last 3 years. Most of that's on the recycling side. 3 years ago, we weren't paying anything for recycling, and now we're paying tens of thousands per month. At the same time, we've seen our tree management costs go up as more and more trees have had to come down. So we're spending more and more on that item as well. And then with regard to position refills, back in 2012, the police department had 9 vacancies. And then since the new collective bargaining agreement was adopted at the end of 2013, we've replaced all but one of those. And at one point, we were actually full staff, but we had a retirement this year. So again, those costs are in the police department budget, but without the revenue growth to help sustain it. Or we had been relying on business tax growth to sustain it. So what the numbers look like, 17 through 20 are up here at a very high level, about $35.5 million in revenues, and about $35.2 million in expenses. So we have a positive net revenue of about $265,000 estimated for 2020. And I'll do the laser pointer on here for Barron so the folks at home get to see it as well. And I'll go into a little bit more detail, but the revenue, again, it's more normal growth. The business tax is specifically not as aggressive as in prior years, and there's a couple different factors that get us to this 13.9. License and permits, you can see, are kind of up and down, but that all depends on the type of development we have in town. The township's had some redevelopment that has generated some significant permit fees over the last couple of years. As we do each year with the budget, we anticipate a regular type of year, as we don't want to count on those revenues, and if they don't materialize, then we're scrambling a bit. Payroll and related, we see some growth there. Again, it goes to a couple different factors. First of all, we're more fully staffed in some of the departments than we were even back in 2017. We filled some vacancies. And at the same time, and I talk about this every year, is that when we estimate payroll, we're estimating every single employee as though they're here from January 1 to December 31 on a full year. So it's a bit of a highest cost scenario. Inevitably throughout the year, there are situations where folks leave, folks retire, their savings realized, positions will go vacant for some period of time and savings are realized. So when we budget payroll, we're doing so kind of at a highest cost possible situation. And then capital, debt service, those are regular, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about those. So as of now, we're at a positive net revenue. But we know that there's more there's more requests out there than we have money for. So items not included in the base, we've provided a menu of items that have come to our attention throughout the year, along with some estimates for 2020 and what those dollar amounts might be for the capital program. And I'll go into this again, but that assumes we approve every single project that's slated under 2020 for the capital plan. It's $5.3 million. quite honestly, that's probably more than we could actually install, just logistically based on staffing. But the numbers in here and the projects in the backup detail, we'll get into more detail as we go through these future meetings. Requests are being made by police and public works for additional staffing. For police, additional patrol, as well as a new crime unit for public works, a tree crew. I have that bracketed with Township Tree Maintenance Program. You'll hear from the Shade Tree Commission on their recommendations on funding to that. That's in concert with this. Those are bracketed because it's really one or the other. I'm not sure we would do both. At the same time, Public Works is also asking for one additional staff member in each of their three major service areas, including their infrastructure, their park maintenance, and solid waste. We have some planning updates that we've spent some time in these meetings talking about with the comp plan, zoning, saldo, and stormwater ordinance rewrites. These numbers this estimate is contemplating hiring a consulting firm who would come in and shepherd the process through, and that includes all four of those. Obviously, we can take it apart and do it in bite-sized pieces a number of different ways. We have the Ready 100 consultant that has been requested. I actually have the Township Tree Maintenance in here twice. I apologize for that. I'll clean that up. And then we have a GIS/PEG program investment that we haven't spent a lot of time in these meetings talking about yet, but there's real opportunity we see in enhancing our use of the GIS software to provide more data behind decisions ranging anywhere from infrastructure with traffic, signals, or locations of parks and amenities to where population is, and really the opportunities are limitless, but it does take someone with a GIS background and someone who can, a specialist to help drive that program, as well as additional programming capability. So there's an estimate in there for that. And then, as I mentioned, with the entities that we're currently funding that are outside of the township's base service, we have the fire companies, library funding, and the other community organizations. We have what we're funding in 2019. And again, we'll hear more specifically from them next week on exact amounts for next year, but we incorporated a 2 3/4% increase for operating funds for each of those and listed it here. So obviously the sum of these numbers is bigger than $246,000 that we're showing as a positive net revenue. So rather than administratively trying to prioritize and figure those out, we wanted to lay them out tonight, and then that will start the conversation moving forward as we head through the rest of the budget program. So to make sure that everyone understands where we're at with the major revenue and expense assumptions, some of this is refresher. We've been through this in prior years, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. The township has three primary buckets that we put our revenue into. We have the real estate tax, we have our Act 511, which is mostly the business taxes, and then we have all other revenue. When we talk about our real estate tax, it's obviously driven by the millage rate that the board adopts annually as part of the budget. Here is a history of where the township's millage rate has been from 2012 through current. We had one adjustment in 2016 specifically to pay for the debt service on the park and trail bonds that were issued that year. And then we had the increase here for 2019 that went to help with operations. And then a comparison over time with the other two taxing entities that Radnor properties pay on, with the school district, the county, and then the township.
So Bill, just so again, I think you said earlier that there wasn't any tax increases since 2012 or 2013.
2012 to support operations, yes.
So, but there were tax increases in 2016 and 2019. It's over 10%. So what, on 2016, it was, what was that one?
That was specifically to pay the debt service expenses on the bonds that were issued for the parks and trails. So and library, thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, yes, parks, trails, and library.
Well, so that you mean that was the bond? That was we did 2015 and 2016 bonds.
Yeah, they were issued in two transactions, one at the end of 15, one early 16. But at the time the board adopted those ordinances, it also agreed to increase the taxes to pay for the debt service on those bonds.
So
So
that
that's what that increase was.
and that was only for the increase in the debt service for that.
Yes, yes.
So
And-
there was a slew of projects there. There was 30 or 40 projects in total.
Yeah, one library project and then many trail and park projects.
Right.
Yes.
And then in 2019, there was a 6% increase, and as I recall, that was a payment for the increases, or that was retaining the planned increases in the catch-up on the pension accrued unfunded actuarial liability.
Well, at the end of the day, what was being contemplated last year was suspending the OPEB funding plan to plug or to eliminate a funding gap in the general fund, and the board elected to adjust the millage rate to prevent that so that we could continue with the OPEB funding plan.
Right. So that's not technically an operating expense. That was remember what we had a 40-year plan to catch up on our underfunding of the pensions that were put in place for decades, and we wanted to suspend that catch-up payment, and in the end, the board voted to actually make that payment so that we stayed on schedule, but that really went into the pension. That didn't go to increase services to the township at all.
Yeah, I will agree with everything you said with the differentiation between pension and OPEB.
What did I say, OPEB?
You're saying pension, it's really for the OPEB plan. Pensions.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, you're right.
regulated by-
It was for OPEB, all right, it was other post-employment benefits. It's the same, it was a catch-up.
Yes.
It's a catch-up for
Everything else was.
pensions
exactly right.
underfunded and OPEB is underfunded.
Well, pension, we are funding the pension's a little different in that we are funding it based on the actuarial assumptions, and the township really always has been. It fell behind based on market conditions and unrealistic assumptions, or a mismatch of funding versus reality. And I won't go into a lot of detail tonight about that, but we are funding pension, and the reason why I'm emphasizing that is there's a state law that mandates we make a minimum obligation, and we make that payment annually, and it's something that is audited. And I don't want there to be any confusion on us not making that payment, because the township has always made that payment based on its legal requirement to do so.
That's the minimum municipal obligation.
Yes.
However, we're still below what we would plan to be for that pension.
Yes, we are amortizing losses or underfunding in the pension plans as a result of actual costs to the program being greater than what was funded. The difference with OPEB is there's no regulation at the state level, no mandate to fund it at all. The township has elected to fund and try to catch up on its OPEB obligations. That's what was being contemplated a year ago. And ultimately what the board directed was continue paying the OPEB funding plan and adjusted taxes to help with that.
Yeah. And again, my point is with both of those are payments going for accrued benefits for past employees, and really not something that the constituents would see as part of their return or the services provided by the township to them. That's not going to increase those.
Agreed. Diving into a little bit more detail on the Act 511, which is the broad description, it includes the business taxes that are paid. Business privilege is by far the biggest piece of this grouping. It's about 61%. Mercantile, about 11%. Then we have the real estate transfer, and then the local services. The real estate transfer is paid by, on all transactions, real estate transactions in Radnor Township. The township gets a percentage. And then the local services are paid by all of the workers in Radnor Township, withheld by the companies and then remitted. Whereas the BPT and the mercantile are paid on gross activity by the businesses in Radnor. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time just because we have in other meetings. The business privilege history is we've kind of gone through the roller coaster over the last 10 years where coming out of the recession there was significant increases year over year. It hit the high water mark at about 9 million in 2013 and plateaued. And then we've seen reductions in the last 3 years. So for 2020, we go back and forth on, do we continue this trend downward and land at about 6.5? It's certainly one way to budget, but it's at the same time, given the businesses that are here, we're not seeing a mass exodus. We're seeing actually an increase in the number of filers. So we decided to be consistent with a little bit conservative versus prior years, but in the ballpark with the estimate. And as folks that have heard this presentation before, I always qualify that with it's a bit of an unknown just because it's a tax based on activity that happened a year ago, and we have no indicators that tell us prior to people filing and paying how it's going to do. And then on the mercantile side, those revenues have been pretty consistent over that same period of time. The only blip was in 2013 when we actually adjusted the law, changing the filing dates so that in that year the township only received half of what it otherwise would have. Otherwise, that in 2013 it would have been the same too. That's been a pretty predictable revenue. The last broad categories are all other. The biggest piece of that is our license and permits at about half. Then we do have fines, interest and rentals, grants, the departmental earnings, which are based on the fees that departments earn for or charge for specific services. And then we have a very small amount for miscellaneous receipts that come in that we wouldn't normally plan for. Major expense assumptions. Staffing levels are set at, again, at the levels that were included with the 2018 reorganization that the board approved. Wages are set at 2 3/4 for both of our bargaining units, both the civilian rate unit and the FOP, and those have been collectively bargained already and are fixed. And then for our non-union civilian folks, we budget 2 3/4, and that's an up to amount based on performance at the discretion of the township manager. Healthcare. We received our renewals from Divot, and for 2019, though, we will not see an increase in our health care premiums. Our MMO, the board adopted the preliminary MMO at the end of September. We're actually showing a slight decline in that expense. And then OPEB, just confirming that the $1.4 million is included in the baseline numbers that we presented. And there's a lot going on here, so this is more for your entertainment or reading pleasure when you get a hard copy or go online. But what we're showing here are the full-time headcount levels from 98 to 2020 by department. So we spent a lot of time talking about the vacancies and when they were filled and what our maximum staffing is. But at the end of the day, the township is operating. The high water mark was in the early 2000s. I think it was 2002 or 2003. We're at about 165-ish full-time employees, and we're operating with 128 is the level for 2020, or 19 and 20 for that matter. When it comes to the wages, this is just a slide to show where those are at. Almost all of the wages are in the general fund. We do have a sewer crew that gets charged and paid against the sewer rent money. The expense growth here has been pretty regular based on the collectively bargained increases. The one blip in 2018 is we did have several police retirees that in the leave payouts at their retirement is what caused that little jump up. On the pension, again, we talked about this when we adopted the MMO. We've actually seen a couple years now of slight declines in this expense. For 2020, we're just a shade under $4 million, down from close to 4.2 a few years ago. And we should be receiving our actuarial update from Mock and Hop here in the next couple of weeks, depending on what those new assumptions show or what the updated actuarial numbers show. This number may change once we incorporate those into the budget. Taking a look at our debt, there are just two quick items to point out. First of all, when the board agreed to borrow the $7.3 million earlier this year, it was under the restriction that we do not increase the debt service to the general fund. So this is just confirming that from 19 to 20, the general fund debt service is basically the exact same amount as it has been. So we were able to successfully borrow the money and install those capital projects here over the next couple of years without raising the general fund expense. And then the jump you see for sewer is the jump as a result of the borrowing we did at the end of 2018 and that we refinanced earlier this year. More specifically, when you take a look at the debt service through maturity for each of our funds, you can see the increase over this 9-year period for the sewer fund is paying down that $4.5 million that we borrowed late in 18. You can also see that the general fund is pretty stable. We will have an increase later in like 2027 or 28. And interestingly, the reason for that increase is going to be the bonds that were issued for this building were wrapped around, so the greater amount of principal is later in the life of those bonds. So for at that point, this building will be 20 years old, and for the next 10 years, the last 10 years of those bonds, we will be paying the most for those during the building's life. But we'll roll with that as it comes forward. The park and open space is, we have a few years left on the I think it's 2009 or 1990 park and open space bonds. Those will mature in 2026, and then we'll just have the remaining amount from the Ardrossan purchase a few years ago, and that has gone according to plan over the last couple of years. So this slide it grabs all of the general fund expenses in a little bit more detail by these expense categories. You can see by far the biggest operating expense for the township is going to be in our payroll and our liabilities and benefits, being that it's our folks that provide the services, and that's where most of our costs are at. The capital, you'll see the amounts have been pretty consistent. Again, that's only funding. For the most part, that's only funding the pay-as-you-go portion of the plan. We're still without the pay-as-you-use funding part of it. Debt's been relatively stable. And then there's been some adds and deletes in some of the specific items in the supplies and contracts. But those amounts have remained relatively stable as well. And then the bottom line, $34.5 million from 16. We're at $34.5 million for 20. Again, so the overall expense growth has remained relatively stable over that time period. Capital categories, as we've talked about many times, we categorize our capital into two broad groups. We have a pay-as-you-go and then a pay-as-you-use, and the sum of those two numbers would be our total capital program. When we talk about our pay-as-you-go, that includes the fleet, so the moving equipment that we have with our police vehicles, our public works trucks, and all of the vehicles that move our employees around town and help them do their jobs. Then we have the departmental equipment. I touched on this earlier. That's the equipment that the staff use, and again, to help do their jobs, whether it be some police-specific computerization within the vehicles, other equipment that they have, our leaf vacuums, our leaf blowers, mowers, all of those smaller equipment items are funded in that grouping. We have our IT group. which is a growing piece of the capital budget as we rely more and more on technology and the servers and the networks and the security behind all of that. That is a growing part. We've always had the PEG group, which is the township has agreements with Comcast and Verizon where we get PEG-specific money from them as part of those franchise agreements. And that money is used for the capital equipment that helps us tape and record these meetings. I do note that the township, through agreements with Radnor Studio 21, gives that organization most of the money we receive on PEG. In fact, to the point where, short of a renewal agreement, we're having trouble coming up with the funds to replace the equipment in this room that's pushing 12 years old, and as we're experiencing right now with a couple of the cameras being out, is having trouble continuing to operate. And then finally, the facilities, which the smaller capital associated with the facilities, I highlighted that security cameras at our buildings is one area that we've invested quite a bit in over the last couple of years. But any other kind of facility type of improvements or recurbing, redoing the sidewalks, the paths around the facilities would fall under this category as well, since it's not public infrastructure, and it's something that could be funded on a short-term basis because the amounts aren't that great. When we take a look at the amount, for 2020, it's under 1.5 million, which is about where it's been the last couple of years. And it's forecasted to be in that same ballpark over the next 5 years as well. And then this graph here breaks it out amongst the different departments and divisions to give the board and the readers a sense of how that 1.4 million is being divided amongst the township departments. With, as you can see, more than 90% going to police and public works for their equipment and vehicles. Then we have our pay-as-you-use group. This includes our major infrastructure, that roads, curbs, sidewalks, signals, street lights, our parks and the associated facilities at each of those parks, which may be a playground, a comfort station, a trail, or a paved walking path, parking lots. And then we have our sanitary sewer and our stormwater, each of which have their own dedicated fee meant to pay for those capital items. When it comes to liquid fuels in our roads, we do have a $1 million a year program where the board allocates the gap from what we receive in liquid fuels, which is roughly $850,000. So we're kicking in the other $150,000 to get us to $1 million. And that $1 million goes in annually to the township's resurfacing program. And then based on the number of lane miles the township is responsible for in the township, so the non-state roads, at $1 million a year, that would allow us to cycle through all of our roads roughly every 12 to 13 years. And that's why the decision was made to shoot for $1 million to achieve that recycle period of 12 to 13 years. Where we're still looking for long-term funding plans is in these areas when it comes to the infrastructure parks. And so those will be conversations that we'll continue to have going forward. When we take a look at the capital plan, and these are projects that we presented and went into detail at our special meeting earlier this year, it's changed a little bit since then with updated numbers on a few of the projects, and a few projects have been added. But if we were to install every project that's on the list slated for 2020, we would need $5.3 million. And as you can see, in the out years, we're anywhere from 3 to 5 to 6. We have a significant trail project slated or included on the list for 2024, which causes that year to be more expensive than others. But instead of getting hung up on the numbers, really what we need to nail down here is developing strategic goals, identifying projects that align with those goals, and then from there we can prioritize and fund the projects accordingly. And I think once we nail down strategic goals, identifying the projects is going to be much more efficient and streamlined because it's going to make a lot more sense Certain projects will rise just based on meeting those goals, and other projects maybe aren't as important, depending on what those goals end up being. Sanitary sewer forecast. So switching gears away from the general fund into the sanitary sewer fund, the board met back on May 13th of 2019. We went through a lot of this information that night. I've included it again here tonight. I'm not going to go through it all again. I included it as part of this presentation as a refresher, or for those that weren't here in May, to get an idea of what the sanitary sewer fund's financial situation looks like. I'll just step through quickly. It identifies, what the revenue sources are, which is the rent, which is based on consumption times a rate that the board approves. Then we pay RHM about $4 million a year to send our sewer downstream. Then we have a crew of 3 folks, along with various sewer agreements based on where the flows go. We pay Lower Merion some to send some of the flow that way, Tredyffrin to send some flow that way. So we have various agreements. That all gets lumped into the operations, and of course we have the capital, which is responsible for replacing the infrastructure. When you take the annual cost of the fund and break it in or show it in a pie chart, it would look something like this. The RHM number is pretty fixed from year to year. It does grow over time, as you would expect. Operations grows in a similar fashion as the general fund, because most of this is based on payroll. There is debt associated with sewers, as the township has borrowed money to install projects in the past, including the $4.5 million we borrowed at the end of 2018, which is why the capital amount for 2019 is so high, as we have various projects that we're currently in various stages of installation on those. But this is an amount we'll spend down over the next year or so as those projects are installed. Really the focus is on what we do from there. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. This just helps define why the sewer fund is having the financial issues that it's had. And that's shown here in terms of the numbers. Is we've had a stretch of years where the sewer fund has been losing money or spending more than it's bringing in. In fact, in the last 3 years, the general funds had to bail it out with some significant transfers just to meet cash flow needs. For 2019, we're going to end up with a positive on a fund total. We're going to end up with a positive net revenue. But again, most of that's tied up in the financing sources or the note proceeds that we're going to eventually spend down. So we presented back in May a cash-based forecasting model. And at that meeting, it was requested by the board that we go back and we build a debt-based forecasting model. These next slides step through all that. We start with a status quo. So what the fund might need before it spends $1 in capital, based on expense growth and forecasted water usage. This suggests that some rate adjustments are going to be needed in the near term just to meet normal operating costs, again, before we spend any money on capital. So you'll see those reflected in the yellow shaded parts of that, the bar graph there. Then when we layer in capital, when we met back in May, we were contemplating roughly $4 million a year in capital. That's pretty aggressive both in terms of installing that many projects and in terms of rate. But again, just based on a pure break-even analysis, this graph here is calculating what those rates would be based on, again, these types of operating capital numbers with the water consumption. So we've taken the baseline just to meet operations, and then we layer in on top what the capital need would look like. And then some considerations, some things to take away with that forecasting model. And again, I'm not going to go into detail here. We can read it offline. And then what we circled back with to the board a few days later after that initial public meeting was what it would look like if we borrowed money. So the only difference between this and the cash model is that here we're paying debt service on borrowed funds versus generating the cash up front to pay for the projects. So there's a little bit more of a front-end savings on how much the rate would have to adjust to fund that. And again, that's what this graph is calculating, purely on a break even. So if water consumption is this, expenses are that, this is just the algebra to get to what break even would look like. And then some considerations to keep in mind with debt, a debt-funded program. The assumptions used, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on this just because this was outside of the public meeting. We didn't have a full conversation about it, but we assumed $15 million borrowings, and then we expanded the forecast out over enough time to do that borrowing 3 times. So we'd borrow 15, spend it down, borrow 15, spend it down, borrow 15, spend it down, just to see what the rates and what the cash flow might look like over that period, in addition to what the debt load might look like over that period of time. So when we take a look at, this is the same graph, the break-even analysis, we just expanded the time period out to 2035, again, just to see how this would look. And as you would expect, every 5-6 years, there's a rate adjustment necessary as a new borrowing is done. So that's just paying down on this set of debt plus paying down on a new issuance and then paying down on another issuance. And really, as we have these discussions going forward and the considerations to think about, the biggest one for this is, while there's the rate sensitivity is a little lower on the near term, what ends up happening on the back end is how much debt is the township willing to carry for the sewer program. And at 30-year maturity, with level debt service, it takes roughly 20 years to pay down half of that. So what will end up happening for the foreseeable future is every 5 years, we'll significantly increase our debt load. So it's more affordable on the operating side, but on the balance sheet side, just some things we'll have to take a look at. There's a couple other considerations that, obviously we're talking about 16 years down the road, so it's tough to sit here and make real educated assumptions on what that might look like. I'm not sure borrowing $15 million every 5 years is realistic in terms of the time and the staff resources it would take to install that many projects. So this might be overly aggressive in terms of the rate at which we borrow. But those kind of things, as we get deeper into the sewer fund and policies and funding decisions, we can get into those kind of conversations. So finally, with the sewer fund, we just overlaid here the same long-term rate forecast with our debt program versus what the cash program. And as you would expect, they both kind of end up in the same place at the end of the day. The real difference is on the near term with how quickly capital is needed and how quickly projects are installed and when they're paid for. So the debt program is a little bit more smoothed over this period of time, whereas the cash has an immediate adjustment and then it is a little bit more level. And then just some considerations to take away from this model that I just summarized. So that is real quickly a very high level brush over the sanitary sewer fund and some of the issues that it's experiencing financially. Again, I didn't go into a lot of detail tonight because we spent a few hours doing this back in May, and most of the conditions that existed in May still exist today. So there's not a whole lot to rehash. The only other item I didn't talk about here tonight that's in these slides that I want to emphasize is the need to build in some cash reserves into the sanitary sewer fund, if for nothing else, for cash flow. For example, we pay RHM in quarterly installments at $4 million a year, so each quarter is about $1 million. And that first quarter payment's due before we send the bills out annually. So there needs to be at least that much cash in the fund so that we can make the first quarter RHM payment. The last couple of years, the general fund has had to make that payment for the fund. And then hopefully we can repay the general fund, but, well, we should be able to because the capital funds are there now. And that money won't get absorbed into some emergency pipe explosion. So the next steps with the budget process. We have a special Board of Commissioner meeting scheduled for next Monday night. Township departments are going to present their program, service offerings, and highlights and requests for 2020. We'll hear from the community organizations, the library, the fire companies, and the other organizations that the township has funded or considered funding. And then if there's time, I'm not sure, because I think that'll be a long meeting, to start moving on some of the some decisions that are needed in terms of what's going to be funded at what levels. If not, next Monday, we have the 10th and 24th, where we can identify specific things within a regular board agenda to address. There is a Monday on the 17th that is open and available if a special night is needed. And then ultimately, introducing the budgets ordinance on November 24th, with the final adoption then on December 12th. So again, what we talked about is the baseline for how much the township services cost today, some of the items that are requests in funding outside of that base, and then what we've built our revenue and expense assumptions on. We still have outstanding capital needs to address, and then the sanitary sewer fund is another big one. The other funds, again, are pretty straightforward. We spend what comes in, so I didn't go into any detail about, say, the shade tree. We're going to get a presentation from that group on how to use those funds. Capital fund is based entirely on what's transferred from the general fund for our program. And as I mentioned earlier, the stormwater fund is going to be a product of what we ultimately decide project-wise, what that rate and what that fund might look like for 2020 or beyond. So thank you for that 49 minutes and 16 seconds. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Bill. That was a very good presentation. So you'll be able to get this to us. We'll have hard copy, or it'll be uploaded on the website. Will you be able to email it to us?
All the above.
Okay.
If
Great.
you want a hard copy, just let me know. We'll get one to you. Otherwise, we'll be emailing it out to the board, and we'll be uploading it to the website. We're also going to take this section of tonight's meeting and separate it out as its own separate video,
Okay.
and we'll have a link to that on the website as well.
Great. That's great. Thank you for, I know a lot of hard work went into this and pulling this presentation together, so. And I know there's still a lot of hard work to come, so thank you, and thank you to your staff and the team and everyone who contributed to it. I guess, we do have a meeting next week. Is there any questions that anyone has once we've taken a look at this very high-level view? Anything that you want the staff or Bill to consider for next week that you might want answered that wasn't more clearly spelled out? I know we'll be delving into it a little bit more as we move forward, but is there anything else anyone needs or any questions?
We're going to talk about the stormwater. I asked a couple of weeks ago for stormwater information. I have a series of questions which I will email to you on what you sent out to me a few days ago. So we'll cover that more, I guess.
Yes.
The
and-
stormwater fund and the projects and the balances.
Yes, sir. And then in addition to that, if I may, what came out of the special meeting we had on stormwater was the board asking the administration to go through that list and apply some priority or some ranking to it. We have that ready to go too, so we'll be getting that out later this week ahead of next Monday. Not really anticipating or not knowing how much detail we'll get into, but at least you'll have it in front of you.
I just have a quick question. I know at one point in one of our special meetings, we talked about creating some sort of structure for the community groups to come in and present, and I know that we kind of ran out of time when it came to putting that together, but have you given them any sort of direction so that they, we're kind of all getting similar information from each group, kind of being able to compare apples to apples, like somebody isn't not giving us something that someone else is giving us that we might need?
Well, again, we have the same, this dilemma, for lack of a better word. The organizations each offer their own unique service or offering. It's hard, and that's ultimately what we're tripping up on, is how to aggregate that into something that is consistent amongst all of them. So what you'll see here next week is a presentation and a request similar to what we did last year.
Anyone else have anything for Bill or any questions?
Well, again, with respect to that, I think, and the point has been raised several times, these 501c3 organizations that are separate entities from the township, other than the library, because I know we have Annie here, but the library is the township's library, and so I look at that differently. But where we're giving a gift to a separate 501c3, we have to look at that and whether we continue going through with that. And if we do, we need to isolate and allocate the payment to each taxpayer so that they know, and at least arguably can say that's not a tax, that is a gift that may be deductible for federal tax purposes outside of the SALT limitation.
Can we just, at the very least, can we ask each group, and I think, well, the library should have this information, and actually everyone should have this information, how many township residents they serve, like what's kind of the breakdown, if they can be sure that that's included in what they bring forward, that would be helpful, I think. Anyone else? All right. Bill, thank you very much. We will move along to ordinance 2019-11, rooftop dining adoption, amending Chapter 280 of the Radnor Township Code zoning ordinance by establishing regulations for allowing rooftop dining within the Wayne Business Overlay District. Mr. Norsini.
Good evening, Nick Keneally, representing the Hampshire Family Partnership, and three of the Hampshire brothers, sons are here this evening, seated in the front row. I think this is maybe the third time this board has seen it. It's been reviewed twice by the Planning Commission. It's been approved twice by Delaware County Planning Commission as well. I know that it's been advertised by the township that this hearing was taking place for adoption this evening. I do have copies of the Delaware County recommendation, and I believe in your packet you have both of those, and you also have the recommendation from our Planning Commission regarding adoption of this. It has been, I believe it started in May, several meetings later, there has been modifications recommended by the Planning Commission, which have been incorporated into this ordinance as you see it this evening. I can go through it again, but I think it was all in your packet and well laid out in your packet as to what the ordinance involves.
All right, Mr. Norsini, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, Mr. Keneally has summed it up well. We worked with the Planning Commission, the applicant has been reviewed many times with our Planning Commission solicitor, Mary Everly, and staff does recommend the board act on this and approve.
Great, thank you. All right, so before there are any discussion, may I get a motion to approve ordinance 2019-11?
So moved.
Second.
All right, is there any commissioner comment?
I have just a comment on this proposal, and the area that we're talking about. I think we were talking about the American Pub as the first one that's going to do this, that wants to do this.
Correct.
Now, when Villanova has the parents' weekend, the place is absolutely mobbed, and really a problem to access and to be served. How can these facilities have this many more people with a rooftop, and when we have an influx, we can't cover these people as it is right now? So it's really what I'm concerned about is traffic and adding more stress to an already overburdened area there in Wayne by adding this new seating on the roof. So I'm not convinced that this isn't going to be problematic and cause service as well as traffic delays.
Right. Rich, I believe you're probably referring to maybe a couple times a year. We, as a township, is aware there are parking lots with plenty of parking available even on those evenings. And even on Parents Weekend, what the businesses love, of course, in Wayne, the fact that Villanova Parents Weekend, because it's a lucrative time for them. I know the Great American Pub has always been able to accommodate the people for Parents Weekend, as have Christopher's and the other restaurants in Wayne as well. I don't see it as an issue with it.
Were you out there? I was out having dinner that night, and it was, the parking is all the way by the White Dog. So if you're going to go to the American Pub, nobody's going to park at the White
We're
Dog.
valeting. And matter of fact, I park at the White Dog, that parking lot all the time, and go to the Great American Pub.
I park at AT&T to go to White Dog, but not to go to Great American Pub, though.
Commissioner, this is one of the things that was discussed with our traffic consultant and the planning commission. And what we've all witnessed is the underutilization of our parking lots in Wayne. So folks don't necessarily want to park in the South Wayne lot or the AT&T lot. So the proposal here will utilize that lot by having valet parking. So our traffic consultant did look at this. Folks are going to go there, drop off the car, they go into the restaurant or whatever restaurant they're going to. Their car gets parked over there. You can go there on a given Friday night and folks circle around because they don't want to park further out. This will help utilize that parking, and that was discussed at Planning Commission along with our consultants.
A lot of people don't like to hand their car, their $200,000 car to somebody to go and drive it to the parking lot over there. I'm just saying. Nobody specific. Okay. All right. What about?
I'm not, it's not me. Rich, if it's one of us, it's not me, so.
But again, it's the service. If we have huge delays, and how can we serve a whole rooftop more people at the American Pub, for instance? Let alone deal with the valets and the traffic.
Personally, and I think many people feel this way, when I go to Wayne and see it's crowded, I think it's great. It's wonderful that Wayne is crowded. It is helping everybody. It's helping the township. It is helping the people. It's helping the community when we go in. And it's great to see a vibrant downtown Wayne. And this is what we're hoping this to accomplish here, really, with this rooftop dining. Not only at the American Pub, but someone else wants to take advantage of it as well.
But those people won't be happy when they wait an hour or more for an entree.
Rich, then they don't show up and they don't come, and it's bad.
Yeah.
And then
No, wait, hold on. Can I just interrupt here? Because, Tom, you're my neighbor, and there are a bunch of times that I'm going out to Wayne, and I'm standing outside, and I see you, and you're standing outside, and I snap, and I'm like, dude, we should have Ubered together, because I know exactly, and it's happened at least 3 times that I can recall. So I think you have a lot of bars in there. They all serve alcohol. People are smart these days using rideshare, and I would think, and I'll ask you if Chris Todd was here, have you seen parking a little bit better because of all the ride shares?
There's another 15 restaurants to go.
Tommy, come up.
There's another 15 restaurants in Wayne compared to 10 years ago. You got Estia, you got Fleming's. I mean, there's 1,500 spots down there to park at.
And the ride sharing has the Ubering and that's really freed up some spots, correct? Okay.
And you guys already have kind of a metric, I'm sure, for when you decide when you're going to use valet, because you do use valet parking now on occasion, because I know my son has valeted for you. So, you guys know when you need to employ that kind of assistance when there's going to be a big influx of people, right?
People under 30 don't drive anymore. They Uber. They do. They Uber. Your kids, they Uber,
it's just
sure.
you're not being realistic.
My kids, they all Uber.
What you're all saying here, I understand that you're an advocate and this is something they want. This is not realistic. What the realistic point is that we're overparked, we're over trafficked, and it's affecting service in Wayne, especially when we have these. And it's only a couple times a year. It's more and more. It's not just a couple times a year. It's more and more. So I guess the answer that I'm hearing is, well, we think that it's okay to live with more traffic in Wayne, is what you're telling me.
That's literally the opposite of what our engineer just said. He
So
said there are
so
multiple
the engineer
places that
said
are
the
not
traffic is
allowed.
going down?
No, he said there are multiple places, there are multiple, I mean, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood you to say that there's plenty of traffic, plenty of parking available in Wayne.
There is plenty of traffic. I think you got it right. There's a
No,
moment of
there
honesty
is
there.
Underutilized municipal parking lots in Wayne that this project, whoever does this, will fill. The other thing, to the commissioner's point, we don't know if rooftop dining will bring additional people or if it will accommodate just the people that come on those busy nights. We don't have a formula for that. So conceivably, that rooftop dining, those, quote, extra seats could help accommodate the busier nights that you noted. But this was looked at by our traffic folks, went through all the procedures. We saw no issues with this occurring.
Again, this is what we hear over and over. If the traffic studies and the traffic reports were accurate, we wouldn't have anybody on the streets in Radnor. Instead, it's packed. It's more and more of a traffic. I understand you want to do this, but what I hear is, well, valets will take the cars elsewhere. That still puts more more stress on traffic, and it's not realistic. We're overburdening it, and again, it's the service. You can't, if people wait an hour, people won't come back to Wayne. They won't.
Madam
Okay,
President?
okay, all right.
Hold
I
on, Rich,
think-
now you're in the
Okay.
hospitality business.
I
I
think-
love it. Let me.
Yeah, I think we've exhausted.
I'm in
I
the
think-
anecdotal experience. I'm telling you about anecdotal experiences, and I go to Wayne because I want to see how it's working, you know, and I talk to the business owners. Matter of fact, the business owners, and I talked about proposing new parking in that area. I don't think it's realistic to say, oh, we'll park at AT&T lot for this area at North Wayne and West Wayne Avenue. It's not realistic. People aren't going to do it.
Okay, I think we can opine on the anecdotal information forever. Rich, if you're not convinced by the information that you've been provided, you're certainly welcome to vote against it. I'm going to call for Commissioner Farhi. Do you have something to?
Real quick. So this will be seasonal. I take it you're not going to be open in February, and then when on a nice day in spring or summer, it could rain, and you'll obviously be closed. I look at the Great American Pub as a local place. I don't look at it as people are, I don't want to insult you, people are coming from 30 miles to have one of your burgers, although I'm sure they're very good. It's a local place where it's a walk to Wayne, or as I've said before, it's a $10 Uber. And that's kind of my point, that it's so close and it's just part of the community, that people may meet people for a beer, but I think that in today's society, you take an Uber and it's just gonna make it much better when you do walk
Again,
to Wayne.
I
And there's
disagree.
so much parking if you go behind the church, the Wayne Presbyterian. You have 10-hour parking. You have parking on the street. But sometimes you may have to walk a little bit further than you want.
Okay, let's move on from the parking, because quite frankly, we've exhausted it. I think we've had all the answers. Rich, I understand.
Well, we haven't had, the answer is, again, the answer is
Rich,
that
I
the
understand
people who are
that you
advocating for this
don't
feel it's
agree.
acceptable to add more stress to the parking.
Okay,
and-
if you don't agree, it's okay, you
Yeah.
can vote against it.
Well,
Okay?
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's not
We hear
whether I
you.
agree or disagree. I want to get clear on what the people who are advocating for this are saying, and they're saying, we believe it's acceptable to have more traffic and congestion in Wayne to allow this. That's
Okay.
what they're saying.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments?
So we're not.
Commissioner Abel, do you have a comment? Okay. Anyone else? All right. So I'm going to call for staff comment.
Yes, Madam President, if I may, this is a tremendous business and such an asset to our community of what they have done. The reality of it comes down to people are lazy. They don't want to walk. Yet in Westchester, they will walk 5-6 blocks. In Conshohocken, they will walk 6 or 7 blocks. So the issue is we're not adding more. It's just we have lots that are underutilized. South Wayne lot, nobody wants to walk from there. AT&T lot, nobody wants to walk from there. So the issue is Do we look at them offering valets where people will take cars to these lots just because people don't want to walk? So I think this is a great plan, a great proposal, and I think it'll be a great asset to this community to stay competitive with our neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Zinkowski. Is there any public comment? All right, then I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of ordinance 2019-11 rooftop dining adoption, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 6-1. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Can't wait for it to open. Have a good night. Thank you. All right, Resolution 2019-109, approving the emergency expenditure of $22,610 for replacement of 4 Radnor heaters in the Public Works garage. Mr. Norsini.
Hi, I'll speak to this from my colleague, Steve McNellis. So these 4 heaters were found to be not working. This was done under an emergency, so they're actually in. This is being brought to the board in accordance with our requirements to let the board know that this action was taken and for payment of this emergency work.
Okay. May I get a motion to approve Resolution 2019-109?
So moved. Second?
All right. Is there any commissioner comment?
Yeah, just a couple questions. How old are these heaters?
To the best of my knowledge, these are the original heaters that went in the Public Works facility, which I'll tell you, I've been here 8 years, and that predates me considerably.
Okay, so there's no contract or insurance claim. Okay.
No, it's well beyond that.
Okay.
Anything else? All right. Any staff comment? Any public comment? Please, Sarah.
This is really a question for Steve. Because these are new, they're Energy Star, or they have good thermostats, or are we looking at, because I've seen the heat map for how the heaters work in the Public Works, and it's high off, high off. I mean, there's no pattern to it. I'm wondering if, I mean, they're in, so, but I'm
Correct.
just wondering if they have.
I couldn't answer that, Sarah. I don't know. I'm going to assume they're more efficient because they're 20 years newer than what was in there. But this is a very large open space.
Right.
That's heated with overhead heaters. So I think you're going to have that up, down all the time.
Well, I think that's something that eventually the Green Team Ready for 100 Energy Planner will begin to look at. I know that I live in an old house. It's almost 100 years old, and my dehumidifier had to work 24 hours a day, 365. And I learned about a special plug I could put in, and then the dehumidifier went into it. And because of the change in the pattern of rain, I now can control it from my smartphone, and it's only on when it rains. And I expect to have a real diminishing of my electric bill because of this. So there are ways that we can control some of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there any other public comment?
Steve, these are not electric heaters, are they?
They're Radnor, they're gas heaters.
Yeah, this is natural gas heaters.
Yes, sir. Radnor being the brand name.
Right.
All right.
And they run on natural gas, and they'll last for how long? 20 years?
If you say so, Commissioner,
They're,
I don't have a date on
they're
it.
already bought, right? They're already installed?
That is correct.
All right.
Okay. Any other comment? I'll call the vote. All those in favor of Resolution 2019-109, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Abel off the dais. Resolution 2019-111, authorizing distribution of funds from the Stormwater Fund. I'm going to throw that to Commissioner Larkin.
This is mine. So we had initially applied for a RACP grant for tree trenches initially in the first ward. The estimated cost for those are going to range somewhere between $120,000 to $150,000 per tree trench. A tree trench is exactly what it sounds like. It's literally a hole in the ground. It ideally connects to a stormwater drain, but there are instances in which you could choose not to do so, and it would simply infiltrate. You fill it with crushed stone, amended soil, and then you stick in trees and other plants that allow for faster evapotranspiration of stormwater that ends up in the tree trench. So the RACP grant, we're either not going to get it, or it's going to take a whole long time for us to get that money. And the bottom line is we have stormwater problems that are going to need to get fixed sooner rather than later. I've talked with Steve McNellis and with Steve Norsini, and they're both pretty confident that we have the expertise in-house to start installing these ourselves. The nice thing about that would be that instead of spending upwards of $120,000, we think that we can do it in the neighborhood of $20,000 to $30,000 per trench. We'd like to put in a test trench at Cowan Park, which is township-owned property. It would give us the opportunity to build up our in-house expertise so that we can start banging them out faster. And once that's done, get on a schedule to start listing them 2 or 3 times per year, ideally. So it's a relatively small expense. They detain a decent amount of stormwater. It's definitely an iterative benefit for the township in the sense that it's not one big fix that's just going to solve all of our problems. But as we install them in different locations across the township, we can start continuing to chip away at the larger problem. So Steve McNellis has suggested that we could get around to this first one in late spring of, or maybe even early spring, I guess, of 2020. I've asked that we get started not later than the beginning of summer, which would give him plenty of time. We could obviously revisit that as we got closer, but I did want to put a timeline on there. Otherwise, that's about it.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve 2019-111?
So moved.
All right, any commissioner questions or discussion?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. What would this do to staff? How many employees would it take? What are the man hours we're looking for? I guess it'd be best to ask Steve McNellis, and then, would that take them off other, other jobs and?
It would take them off other jobs, and that's why we would be waiting to start until later in the spring, as opposed to, there's nothing that would prevent us from going right now, except we're picking up leaves right now. Later on in the winter, we're going to be shoveling snow. Spring is when he thinks that he'll have a crew who can get on this.
Sure. But there's always something going on, essentially. If you have winter weather or spring, would we be hiring? Would we have to hire? Would we have to reallocate?
No, we would not have to hire, although if we develop continuing expertise and this and similar projects are of a type that we think we want to keep moving forward with, I think it's worthwhile to think whether we want to keep this in-house and hire for specific stormwater projects or just an expanded wheelhouse of public works projects that we could do rather than contracting them out. When we contract projects out, we have a double whammy. Number one, we have increased engineering fees, because we need to have a much more specific set of engineering plans. And number two, we pay prevailing wage. Whereas if we keep the work inside the township, we don't have to do either of those things. So while this particular resolution for this particular project does not call for any additional hiring, I want to keep an open mind in the future about can we save money by doing more things in-house.
That sounds good. I just would like to, are we voting on this, or, okay, I would like to table this because I have questions that I'd like to ask you.
I'll second the motion to table. So my questions on this are along the same lines.
Wait,
One,
whoa, if we have a motion to table, we should vote on the motion to table before you ask your questions on the original motion, correct?
well, let's.
According to Robert's rules, we would, if we have a motion to table with a second, then we should vote to table
All right.
before you go into your continued discussion on the original
Request
motion.
suspension of the vote on motion to table until we finish comments on the original motion.
Yeah. No, Jack, I'm
I
not
think we should just go ahead and vote on the motion to
No,
table.
no,
Is
let's,
there a motion?
I
Are
think we
you
need to
taking
vote,
back your
we need to
second?
vote.
No. I want to tell Jack, I'm not against this. I just have questions that I have to ask Steve.
That's fine. I just don't want to do 8 rounds with Rich.
No, that's fine. I just.
Well,
I just
well
wanna
then,
get
All right,
it
then
out.
well then let's talk
so-
about this, and then we can consider the motion to table in connection with the.
I'm going to call the
with
vote on the motion to table. I heard a motion and a second, so I'm going to call a vote. All those in favor of a motion to table, please indicate.
Point of order, point of
Can we do
order.
this?
We haven't finished, here.
Motion to table
let me,
supersedes the original
point of
motion.
order, we need to finish.
Please stop saying
Our-
point of order.
our
You
vote-
don't know
our
what it
meeting
means.
I'm gonna throw this to our solicitor,
You
Mr.
can
Rice.
Discuss the motion to table, and then you can vote on the motion to table.
I'd suggest since it's an ancillary motion, it doesn't get comment.
board can discuss it, not public comment, the board can discuss it.
I don't think we can discuss it.
In order to evaluate the motion to table, we need to hear the comments from all commissioners on the original motion.
No, we don't.
Yes, we do.
No,
Doesn't
that's your
work that way.
opinion.
Yeah, that's my opinion, that's right. That's right. There's
So I'm going to go ahead and call the
let's-
vote
let's
on the
hear- let's
motion to
hear-
table. All those in favor of the motion to table, Resolution 2019-111?
Point of order,
please indicate by
point of order.
saying
Commissioner
aye.
Farr, Commissioner Farr, will you suspend your motion to table till after, if you don't do it, I'll raise it after discussion.
I'm not trying to make this a political comment. I mean, I like Jack's idea. I just have some questions I want.
Right, so let's talk about the issues.
That wasn't my answer. So
That's
I just-
fine, but can we just get the motion to table over with?
So if we
No,
ta-
no,
if we
why
ta-
don't- let's
don't wanna
discuss,
talk about the
let's
issue.
discuss the
I-
motion,
So-
and then
and
motion to table. If somebody has a valid
I'm calling
reason.
the vote on the motion
Jack,
to table.
Jack,
Commissioner
so-
Booker, I'm calling the
Commissioner-
vote.
Commissioner-
All those in favor of the
Commissioner-
motion to
Commissioner
table,
Borowski,
please
somebody
indicate
make-
by saying aye.
Can you, wait, will you withdraw the motion? Withdraw the motion?
I'm not gonna withdraw the motion. Let's just move
All
on and bring
those-
Steve and we can have the same conversation.
All those in favor of the motion to table, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 6-1. So we will table Resolution 2019-111 until the next meeting, first
And
meeting in
can we
November.
make sure Jake
Rich.
is, or Jake asked, can
So-
we make sure that
Yeah,
McNullis
can
is
we
here
make
for
sure
that
Steve is at the
discussion?
meeting? Please? Thank you. All right, so this will be on the agenda for our first meeting in November. All right, on to item E, discussion of Act 172 tax credit authorization for staff to prepare program documents. So this came up at our last meeting. Act 172 tax credits, I don't, Mr., oh my gosh, John,
Yeah,
Mr. Rice, I'm sorry, I'm like
Well-
blanking on your last name.
Yeah, I think there was,
So we talked about this at our last meeting, and you and I had a conversation about, whether or not this is the way you want to go. What do other municipalities do? I know that we were provided a guideline around this. I mean, I think this is something that we should explore, and other municipalities have done, so.
So here's what, after the last meeting, and discussing this with Bill and Bob, we talked about putting an ordinance together. I have questions about how this gets implemented. And you have sort of the guideline here from DCED on the act. There are some administrative requirements for the fire companies and the EMS companies. They have to certify eligibility for their members. You have to set some kind of standards through a resolution, and you have to adopt an ordinance. So, so there's this additional administrative burden on the fire companies and EMS companies. I don't know whether there's been discussion between those groups and the township administration. I would suggest that ought to happen, so everybody understands how this is going to work. But this is basically a 20% credit against real estate township real estate taxes only, not school district, just township, for volunteer members that live in Radnor Township. So that's sort of the basic way this is set up. Lower Merion did this a couple years ago, and theirs is set up that way. They give out a credit, and then they basically get reimbursed from the township if you want to go through this process. I've seen other municipalities just give compensation to volunteers separately from this tax credit program. But there is some administrative issues here. There's audits that have to be done on an annual basis. You folks are going to have to certify the eligibility requirements once it gets set by ordinance. And I think there needs to be some discussion before I start putting an ordinance together, which has all these things in it, and you decide what those eligibility requirements are. I think this DCED outline sort of gives you the roadmap to get from point A to point B. And if this board's ready to do that, and authorize us to do that, to match this, then I think that's where we're at. And then we need to meet with fire companies.
Eamon, do you want to? Please,
Yes,
Diane.
thank you for me bringing this up again. I know we talked a little bit last month about different things we can do to entice folks to volunteer at the fire companies, but also to keep them in place, the folks that we currently have. I think to make this easy, and I can get back with Mr. Rice and the manager and the finance director, I'll get with our chiefs at Radnor. I'll touch base with Chief Kincaid at Bryn Mawr and Chief Dobbins at Broomall, because I think the one thing besides administrative requirements is, all right, if we do the full 20%, what's the impact to the township? So we need to identify between the 3 fire companies that provide service, how many of those are actual homeowners in Radnor Township, because obviously, as you know, we have younger folks as young as 16 that I don't know how many 16-year-olds own a house in Radnor Township. I don't think we have any, but we'll get that list together. And as far as the tracking requirements, we're all using either emergency reporting or fire software to track responses and activity levels. So basically, it's part of the administrative process, which we'll talk in more depth or more detail offline. The fire chiefs will basically sign off for the folks that we submit on the initial list that own homes that are eligible, and they will submit a documented list, notarized if needed by the township, saying these folks are eligible for the tax credit, and that would flow into the finance director or to the manager, and we could just determine what the timing would be, depending on what you all feel is appropriate during the course of the year. So that to me, it's very easy for us to do. This is probably one of the easier things we can do internally as far as administrating things. That really is not that big of a pain for us at all.
So before you guys go through all that effort and work and, meeting with everybody, I just want to, is there the will of the board, is there consensus of the board that this is something we are willing to explore, something that if it came before us, it is something that we find agreeable?
I think it's an admirable and worthy thing to pursue. What I hear John saying is there might be other easier ways to do it. For instance, maybe just a $500 stipend per volunteer in Radnor if you're a homeowner. Instead of the audit and maintenance requirements, maybe just make a one-time payout each year certified by the fire company.
We would have to look into doing that sort of parallel or differently from this. What this sets up is the firefighters, the volunteers pay their tax, the real estate tax bill. There's no credit on their tax bill that comes from the treasurer or the tax collector. And then they have to apply to the township for the credit, the 20% credit. So they pay it all in, and then we give that back. The township gives back the 20%.
20% of the real estate taxes for the township only.
Yes, the municipal.
Not for the county, not for the school district.
Correct. And then there's eligibility criteria, which is not just, that talks about the volunteer's eligibility. Number of emergency calls the volunteer would respond to. The level of training participation, total amount of time expended. Are you going to have sort of here's the criteria. If you're on the job 30 days, you're not eligible. If you're on the job 6 months, so township sets that eligibility criteria in consultation with the fire company. So, there's things that need to be in these documents. There's an ordinance, and then there's some resolutions, a resolution that you'd probably set annually. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the chiefs of the companies to make sure that the people that they're certifying meet the eligibility criteria.
Eamon, I think that the issue is this is a relatively small amount of money. So, Bill, what's the average township real estate tax bill? It's a few $100s, isn't it? Is it 1,000? Is it like right? But I'm talking about the average. Yeah, if you have an average one, say it's 1,000, which I think is probably a little high, but right. So if it's 1,000, it's a $200 credit. Between the effort that the person needs to do to pay it and to fill out the papers and for you to check it and then to audit it, we're going to spend $200 in effort to do that. So why don't we just pay $200 to every and pay it? We can say we'll give you $200 to use towards your property taxes, but you can use it for whatever you want.
That's an alternative. And I know Some municipalities have done that, where it's just, you do the same calculation, but you're not going through the real estate tax bill credit process. It's just a stipend. And you got to be careful how you do that, but it ought to be set up in a similar way.
Right. So using the tax code for this benefit it's administratively a headache, and it's gonna cost a lot more than it's worth to do that. It's worth it just to give the benefit, but let's do it the easiest way, I would say.
Yeah, can I just follow up with that? I love the idea that we're thinking outside the box to help firefighters pay less taxes, and the township needs to do more. Just curious, what does the average firefighter pay out of pocket? I know that do they pay for some of their equipment or uniform, or what are the costs associated? Because the question is getting back to what Rich said, if it's more than $200, I would rather just give them the money to pay some of those costs as opposed to have, because if you don't know, if you live in an apartment and some of your people live in an apartment, they can't take advantage of that.
Correct.
And that's just not, it's just not, it's really not fair, and it doesn't help those who are really trying to, we're really trying to keep us as firefighters.
I understand. There's some nuance between the three fire companies, but my understanding among the three is the core equipment. So we call it our Class B uniform. So you see us wearing it like our Fire Prevention Expo, or we're out talking to kids in the community, to school during fire prevention. Those are things the fire company purchases. Add-ons, T-shirts or extra things. Our personnel will buy those. Really, the largest out-of-pocket expense for folks is the gas they're using going to calls. They're responding from their home to the station. That's as far as a personal expense with your service. Some people are able to write that off with their taxes, depending on how much they accumulate. But obviously, that wear and tear on the vehicle that goes on as well, that we don't really capture in our taxes at the end of the year. Really, we're fortunate. We've done a good job with the three fire companies, Radnor, Bryn Mawr, and Broomall, taking care of our folks, especially our volunteers. So, going back to what Commissioner Booker says, and really, this is a tool that's only been in place for a few years. The state just did it. There was actually pretty significant press conference today in Harrisburg that I had an opportunity to be a part of, announcing a lot of bills that are rolling out. One of those talks about the school taxes having up to 100% ability to eliminate those for volunteers, which I don't know what school district's going to go for that, but obviously 20% of the school taxes versus 20% what we're talking here are two different animals. We all know that. But like you said, Commissioner Fari, this is really up to you all. We will do, if we can get the 20% for the homeowners, that's excellent. If you're looking at maybe doing a stipend program to capture some of those folks that don't own property, hey, that's great too. But like you said, I think trying to take some action and get this moving is positive. And, we at least have some tools in place that we can do that now, that you all can do that as the ultimate decision makers in the community.
So when I was first appointed, you had that luncheon upstairs, and it was kind of a survey. Do you remember that?
Yes, that was part of our strategic planning session, yes.
Do you, and your facility in Bryn Mawr, it's so cool. I've been inside, I've been downstairs. I have not been to Broomall, but I've been to yours. Do you rent that out? Are there other kinds of ways to increase, to do some kind of revenue generation from your facilities? They're very nice. I'm not.
Yeah, from time to time, we do some events at Radnor. However, there's additional personnel time that's got to get put in. Typically, it's going to fall back on the volunteers. We do a lot of station tours for folks, informally, just stopping by. Or we may have someone wants to do a birthday party. We'll allow them to do a station tour. We haven't really gotten into that area. Some other fire companies do. We are doing 2,500 ambulance calls, about 800 fire calls. So there's a lot of going in and out, and it can be very chaotic, especially walk through Wayne. It literally is a circus at the firehouse. You're trying to corral 50 kids, and we got fire trucks going in and out the door. We enjoy the community, want them to be part of the fire company, but having events and doing that adds a whole other layer to our operation that, at the moment, we're not closed-minded to it. It's just we're not really focused on that at the moment.
I can understand how it's a headache. I didn't know if it's lucrative enough to offset being a headache of having people come in and you have a call when there's a birthday party, and then you gotta you'll have some unhappy kids.
Can we just kind of stick with what we've got?
Yeah.
I mean, I know you want to, we
Yeah.
want to try to find creative solutions, but let's,
Right,
I got you. but
I'll
let's stick
authorize,
with what we've
I'll
got.
authorize this to go forward, but we just got to look for however you can do it so that we don't spend more
Yeah.
in gyrations.
And
Yeah,
can I just ask, so
simplify it.
Eamon, you did say, so they're considering right now there being some sort of ability for the school, it to apply to school taxes as well?
Correct.
Or does it apply, it can't apply to school taxes right now?
We would have to
Okay.
go to the
No,
school
it's
board.
just,
You'd have to go.
it's just
Well,
township.
just township.
Owner-occupied
Not yet, but-
property. It's gotta
Okay.
be Owner-occupied.
So it couldn't even be a rental property if you had that.
It's owner-occupied. It's clear in the act. It's gotta be owner-occupied.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a,
And the property
Narrow-
owner has to
narrow
be
group.
registered for the homestead exemption.
Okay. So do I hear consensus of the board that it's worthy to explore and whatever option rises to the top based on, what is not going to be a burden to the fire departments as well as township staff when it comes to administrative and whatnot, what would be the best option? So you guys to meet and pull together some options to bring back to us to consider. Do I hear consensus on the board?
Yes, consensus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Eamon, before you sit down, I understand that one of the bills is up for vote this week. Is it SR4 or something like that?
The Senate SR6 fire EMS report was released towards the end of last year. So over, this week and next week, the House is back in session in Harrisburg, and they're going to run through a lot of these different bills to get that moved on to the Senate. One of the big ones, and especially with you and I mean pretty much everybody on the board here, we talked about the direct pay for EMS,
Right.
and that's really the big one. So that's one of the main reasons a bunch of us went up there today to talk about the direct pay, because if they can get that at least to the Senate and keep that moving, that's been in the pipeline for about 14 years at this point.
So
trying
we
to get the checks back to
The
us.
reason I asked, I think it'd be appropriate for us to ask our reps and senator to support those.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Are
I mean, I
they-
know obviously that, these are state issues, but ultimately they have local implications big time. So anything you all can do to, go represent a mayor, state, Senator Leach and the other folks, that's really important that they hear from you as well. So we appreciate that.
So the one is in the House, though, the one about direct pay, that's in the
Correct.
House,
That is
correct?
in the House right
And
now.
SR, that's the Senate. So I wonder if it's worth it for us to do a resolution for us, for our next meeting, to support those. We could. To do a
Sorry, yeah.
resolution.
So with the EMS, when we bill for services, how people are getting a check, it goes to the insurance company, and then we end up running around trying to chase down the check. The goal of the bill is to eliminate that return back to the provider directly, which helps with their cash flow and helps with their overall collections of the services rendered.
Yep, just one comment, and I'll definitely support anything we can do to help attract new volunteers to the fire company. But I just want to remind people that the last meeting, when we talked about possibly giving a $10,000 scholarship to a student, people on this board said that was too low. Nobody would go for it. We're talking about $200 now. So it would take a volunteer 50 years to get $10,000. I don't think that $10,000 is too low.
It's a different context, though. I mean, because that was in the context of 50,000 or 60,000 in tuition, right? So anyway, we're talking about a very narrow slice of people. Either it's people who are at university or volunteering, or people who have a house, who have a homestead exemption, and who are volunteering, and then the auditing. So I see there's different sides of the same there's the same issue. $200 is low too. However, this is something that there is a model for that's we actually have something to work from. So
Okay, any other commissioner comment? Did you want to say something, sir?
Doug Felsky, Radnor Fire Company. Just the scholarship thing, I think is a great idea. And I think I'm looking forward to working on that somehow. But just to let you know that a gift of anything is appreciated by the fire company. And when people get something personally, it really means a lot to them. The parking thing, which probably maybe $2 a month is what they're saving by having a parking permit, but that really means a lot to the guys. So that's going to help us with retention and recruitment. So I appreciate that.
Do you guys have parking permits?
We do.
Oh, you do? Okay, sorry. I was unaware of that. Okay. Okay, great, all right. All right, so I think I hear consensus for you guys to work together and then bring something forward to us, because we do want to, do what we can to support. And then I think maybe we create a resolution to support, what is it, HB? Do you know the number for the bill?
I'll send it to you. I believe it's 1347.
Okay.
But it's SR6.
And SR6.
There's a bunch of recommendations in the report. I can send it to this. I'm sure the staff have looked at it, but really the board is supporting all those recommendations in the report. Many are very straightforward. And some unfortunate things that have been hanging out there for years and years and years, and some go back to the 70s. They just got stalled, or they stopped in the House, stopped in the Senate, or the governor didn't sign. So we're hoping that a lot of these, with bipartisan support, get through.
Great, yeah, I took a look at that SR6, and it is bipartisan support for that, so.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, any reports from our standing committees? Does anyone have anything they want to report out on? Want to report out on anything for the library? No? Okay. And I know we'll be hearing from Shade Tree next week, and I know they have a plan that I think they've shared. You got that, right? I think we all got that. All right, is there any new business this evening?
New business. John, you were not here last meeting when we talked about the resolution that was eventually passed. I abstained on that. I wanted to be sure that you weren't speaking for the board. Our understanding is your letter to the court in support of Phil R. Was submitted, and I would ask you to provide a copy of that letter to the Board of Commissioners for review so that we can see what you included in that to ensure you didn't speak for any of us.
I spoke for no one but myself, and that letter you should be able to obtain from the court. I will not provide it to you.
It's under seal, so we can't get it.
Well,
Will you provide a copy?
If it's under seal, I am not going to provide it.
You're able to provide it if you want to.
I am not going to provide it. Which part of that sentence didn't you understand?
Okay, gentlemen,
I want to make sure I understand.
Commissioner Booker.
I want to make sure you understand that you may. It's not.
Commissioner Booker.
Obviously, you don't understand the process, and you're a lawyer.
Okay,
I
all right.
I understand.
Thank you
I just
very
want to make sure.
much.
Well, I want to be clear
Is there
that
any
you're
other new
refusing
business
to.
this evening? Any other new business this evening? All right, do we have any old business we need to address?
I have a bit of old business. I would like to. I would like to recognize Commissioner Borowski for her support of PICO and the implementation of the 100th community on the natural gas in her ward. She's going to be speaking on that, and PICO will be recognizing the expansion of natural gas service to the community. It's cheap, clean burning, efficient fuel source that I hope we have well into the next century. And I appreciate Commissioner Borowski supporting PICO in their efforts.
Thank you for
I
that.
plan to attend also.
Thank you for that very facetious remark,
And
Commissioner
in light
Booker.
of that, I think that we should.
I think that,
Ready for 100 resolution, and maybe we should rescind that.
thank you, Commissioner Booker. I look forward to participating in that, and I do look forward to
Supporting
to PICO.
supporting fossil
Supporting-
fuels and expansion in Radnor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And supporting PICO's efforts around expansion of their grid in order to include solar energy, which is something that they are looking at and doing. And in fact, PICO is coming to speak at the Ready for 100 Renewable Energy seminar that Sarah spoke of earlier this evening, and perhaps you'd like to join. It is Thursday, October 29th.
I don't plan on it,
correct?
but again,
Okay.
it's
Tuesday.
natural gas,
Sorry.
not celebrating
Tuesday,
the natural
October
gas
29th.
expansion in Radnor, and I appreciate your
Thank you.
efforts to support
Well, then
that.
certainly
Can I get
join
a second
us.
on the
That
motion
would
to
be
adjourn?
wonderful.
Anybody?
Second.
We need to have public comment, thank you. Is there any public comment this evening?
Good evening, Roberta Winters, 326 Williams Road. I would just like to remind the public that on November 5th, there will be an election. Among those being elected will be school board members, county council, and some commissioners from wards 1, 3, 5, and 7. There will be a forum to be held this Thursday evening for the commissioners so that the public may wish to hear them speak on and answer a variety of questions. So we would like to invite the public. It'll be here Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. We hope to see the public here. And when you spoke about the parking pass that we provide for the fire company, one of the things I learned in speaking to the township officials is on election day, there is free parking around the polls, and a lot of people don't realize that. So on November 5th, people can go to the polls and park without dealing with the kiosks. So thank you.
Roberta,
Thank you, Dr.
great reminder.
Winters.
Bob, can we have signs up on those? Because I know that it impacts Ward 6.
We can do that. We can have those up.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment this evening? All right, may I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you all. Have a good evening.